Hey guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for listening to our content, and please like and subscribe. Back to Pure Athlete. I'm Jeff Francoeur along with Britt Lee, Brad Williams. We hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving, enjoyed crushing turkey, watching football. It was a great time, but I'm excited about our guest this week. He's a buddy of mine, huge Braves fan, Dawsonville's own, 2020 NASCAR Cup Series champ, and one of the best in the business. Chase Elliott. Chase, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, man. Appreciate y'all having us. Glad it finally worked out.
Oh, thank you,
man.
bud. Yeah, so before we get going, just kind of what you're up to now. I know everything starts back in February, but how's the offseason been for you?
Yeah, it's been not as good as I would probably want it to be. It's crazy. I had shoulder surgery here a couple of weeks ago now, and it was kind of brought on last second. My shoulders bothered me for years, and I felt like it was time I asked somebody about it. When I asked them about it, they were like, "Hey, your shoulder's kind of messed up. You might need to get surgery on it." So this conversation happened when I was at Phoenix, which was our last race of the season, and I knew, if I was going to do something, I was going to have to do it pretty quick. So I ended up getting an MRI and kind of getting the ball rolling on that whole process right after the season was over, and knew that we were going to have to get it done because there was only a couple months off before we get back started again in early February. So had to get it done. And so that's been kind of my off season, really. I was looking forward to doing some fun stuff, but instead I'm going to be doing physical therapy. So here we are.
Man, I'll tell you what, we talk a lot about Pure Athlete, especially to younger athletes, about grit, perseverance, overcoming adversity. And I know 2023 probably for you was your toughest year yet. What did you take away from this year and really learn about yourself?
Yeah, it's definitely been a tough one. I mean, just the way the whole year, I mean, I feel like, and too, as I've gotten older, I feel like there's so many lessons to be learned just from getting older and viewing things from a different perspective. It's been kind of weird, but, getting into my later 20s, lay down, please. The dog, he's very needy, but you get into your later 20s, and I don't know what the experience was like for you guys, but I certainly view things a lot differently today than I did, say, 4 or 5 years ago, which has just been, as I transition through things like this for the first time, it's super interesting. But I've certainly enjoyed the process, and I think as time goes, you're going to have situations and periods that don't go your way, and to your point, this year was definitely one of those moments. I mean, we started the year off strong, felt like we were kind of shaping up to have a pretty good year. Next thing you know, week 3 or 4, I'm laid up in the hospital, fixing to, I knew right then I was probably out for quite a while. And honestly, I got back quicker than I was thinking I was going to. So from that standpoint, it was good. But, you sit there and you watch the races go on without you, and that can kind of put you in a different perspective just from how you look at things. And so definitely some lessons learned there. I wouldn't necessarily change anything. I wasn't out doing anything stupid. So I'm not necessarily saying that, but just the experience of having to sit out, watching your car go around the racetrack, and then coming back, and then we struggled really for the remainder of the year, and there were some high spots in there, some times where I thought we were talking about the right things and doing the right things and making some progress, and I feel like all the ingredients have been there. And there's been these glimpses of hope and with this new car of getting things going. And I feel like we're finally kind of going on the right direction. It's just been a process. And sometimes that's what life is. It's a bit of a process, and you gotta work through it.
Well, Chase, take us what it was like growing up in Dawsonville, Georgia. Kind of what were things you were most involved with? Did you play sports? Were you always kind of headed toward being a race car driver, or were you interested in other things?
No, I was in. I've always been a huge sports fan, really, as long as I can remember. But my childhood, I guess, was kind of unique. We were from North Georgia. I'm originally from North Georgia, and then in the early 2000s, my dad, he quit racing full time, and he loved Colorado a lot. And I mean, he loved going to vacation out there, and he kind of thought that when he got done racing full time, that he wanted to move out there. So, I was 6 or 7 or whatever it was at the time, and my parents decided that they wanted to move out west and give it a shot. So we did that. And I had just started to race go-karts around home. So when we moved out west, I feel like that was kind of where my childhood really got going. I was getting old enough where if you were getting more involved in sports, that 6, 7, 8 range, and kind of starting to understand a little more of what was going on. And when we moved out west, I did some racing out there for a couple years, but it was such a blast. I mean, I had buddies, that I went to school with out there, and, that part of the country is such an outdoors area. I mean, if you're not outside doing something, you're not living. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, in the summertime, you're, skateboarding or whatever it may be. And in the wintertime, obviously you have the snow sports, that can go on as much or as little as you want. So, and then obviously the racing in the summer, for me was a lot of fun too. There was a couple racetracks in Denver, a couple racetracks on the western side of Colorado that we spent a lot of time doing that. So those years were super fun. And then kind of got to a point where I felt like I wanted to pursue racing. Obviously, I was still very young, but I wanted to at least try. At least I had it in my head I wanted to try. And so we moved back home because there wasn't really a lot of racing in Colorado. We got to a certain point, it was fairly competitive. And then I would say, like anything, I'm sure there's parts of the country that, if a kid wants to grow up and be a baseball player, there's probably more competitive areas to grow up and play in. I don't know this. I'm asking.
It's true.
Okay, so that makes perfect sense. Same way for racing. There just wasn't a lot of competitive racing to advance through out there. So I moved back here, and that's when things really kind of started to get serious, I guess, from the racing standpoint. And at that point in time, I was starting middle school, and I was kind of full-time racing every weekend, really, from that point all the way until now. So I would have loved to have played sports. I was, as you know, I'm a huge Braves fan and huge Georgia fan, and just admire sports as much as anyone. I respect the game, whether it be football, baseball, soccer, you name it. I love it, and I would have loved to play more if I was even good enough to do it. I just didn't have the time, and I had my eyes set on the racing thing, and wanted to try to pursue it.
So Chase, a lot of our audience probably doesn't know what developing as a racer is like as a kid. So you said you started go-karts at 6 or 7, and then you were kind of all in middle school. Can you kind of take us through what that looks like for a kid who might be interested?
Yeah, and it's probably changed some. This
Yeah.
is weird saying this, but it's probably changed some since I was little, just because what hasn't changed in the last 20 years, right? But I think that one of my teammates at HMS now, William Byron, he didn't do a lot of racing when he was a young kid. And the stories I've heard, I don't think he even started racing actual cars until he was a teenager, which is kind of crazy. Because I was racing go-karts and, these small little cars when I was 8. So that was kind of the path I took. But for him, heck, he was doing a lot of iRacing. And that's where a lot of these guys are, figuring out that they have interest in the sport or into motorsports is through iRacing, which is crazy. But it's totally a reality now. And, believe it or not, there's a lot of good habits that you can take away from driving online and doing that stuff and competitive arenas to race in. So it's probably a little different now, but for me, I was racing go-karts when I was first getting going, and I stepped into a probably mid-sized car, let's call it a legend car, when I was 11 or 12, and then I was racing full-size cars when I was 13 or 14 and have been ever since.
So your learner's permit allowed you to drive how fast at that age?
Well, my learner's permit, 55, I guess, but at the racetrack, it was all you could get for sure.
Obviously your dad was an unbelievable racer. What kind of relationship for y'all? We talk a lot on here about athletes and their moms and dads, and did he push you a lot? Was he more there kind of help you along the way, let you ask questions? And I mean, did you love it the first moment you raced?
I did. I mean, I certainly did love it. I mean, when I was a kid, I mean, there was just nothing else that even, and it was just nothing that ever even sparked my interest as far as what I actually wanted to pursue and do down the road. Yes, I love playing baseball and I loved other sports, but I always had racing at the top of my mind. And I think that probably just came from, growing up around the racetrack and NASCAR was booming there in the early 2000s. I mean, there was not a whole lot bigger at that point in time. In my eyes, at least, it was the show every weekend. And for me as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, imagine, going to the racetrack and your dad being a part of one of the biggest shows in America every weekend. Right. So, it just, I had such a different vantage point, and I'm so grateful for it, to be able to see things the way I saw them, because I grew to have such a large respect for what went on behind the scenes. And I kind of saw from an early age just the amount of teamwork that goes into this and just how much goes into putting on that show every weekend. And it was thriving. So that was really where a lot of my interest came from, those early 2000s days. Dad had just gotten back into a competitive car, and he was winning races and he was having fun, and I was a sponge, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And so of course I wanted to grow up and try to give it a shot.
Chase, as you look back, I mean, you've had an incredible amount of success at a pretty young age. What kind of sets you apart? What's the secret to your success? What are you really great at behind a wheel?
Man, that's such a tough question. Grading somebody or grading yourself on things that you think you do well. But, I'm pretty detail oriented when it comes to just the craft of driving, much like a guy would be detail oriented at his golf swing or his baseball swing or how he throws the football. Driving is really no different. There's technique to different racetracks. There's technique and ways that you can make your car do different things when it's not doing what you want. I just think that craft of driving and being deliberate with your inputs and making sure that you're looking at the right things. So I would say I'm probably more detail oriented than I ever thought I would be. Too, I wasn't really that way in school, but for some reason I do pay a lot of attention just to a lot of small things. And we have ability to look at data nowadays, so I can sit there and, if a guy goes out there and kicks my butt, last weekend, I can go and ultimately look and study what he had going on and try to dissect and see if I can learn anything from it. But I do enjoy the detail of it, and I just, more than anything about racing, I admire the craft of just how good the guys are at that level. And it's so interesting how many different ways we can all get to the same place. How many different ways a guy can drive a car, and the way he's looking to feel, and just all the itty bitty little things. There's 1,000 different map or roads that kind of lead to the same place if you know how to get there.
I love it when you talk about young athletes, young girls and boys that are listening. We talk all the time how important it is to be a good teammate, right? To be able to dive in. I love when I listen to y'all because, yes, you're the star of the show, right? You're the one, but every time you talk, it's always we. And I love that because the team you have to have behind you. How important is it to have a darn good team in what y'all do?
Oh, I've said for a long time, racing, but also life is about good timing and good people. And without those two things, you got an uphill road, in my opinion. So I've been super fortunate over the course of my life and my career to have a lot of both. And, not only is it important to have a solid team around you to go to the racetrack today and have a fast pit stop on pit road, or, the guys on the pit box call the race the way that it needs to be called, or whatever it may be. But, not only from the standpoint of today, right now, having a good team around you, but as you grow up, I think you can learn so much from example and just having good people to look up to. And as a kid, when someone's doing something the right way. I don't know if that's just the house I grew up in, or, the way my mom and dad raised me, or whatever it may be. But I always feel like there are a lot of good people out there. And in my opinion, over the years, the best way I've ever learned is through example. And I've had a lot of great people to look up to and lean on, through my journey. And now that we're now here and we're competing, at the top level of NASCAR, I feel like I have a lot of great people to lean on now. So, like I said, good timing and good people. You're not going to go very far without either one of them. But certainly, surrounding yourself with good folks, not just in the professional environment, but also in your personal life too, I think can carry you a long way. Following
up real quick on that, what was that relationship like for you and your dad? Was it more of kind of the dad chase, or was it like, my dad's an unbelievable racer, did he lean on you heavy growing up, or what, did he give you room to fail and grow?
He did and he didn't. You have to know my dad a little bit to understand, I guess. His upbringing was just so different than mine, right? And it's been interesting watching him, I guess, as he has been my dad, because it's just a different landscape today. But he definitely pushed me in certain ways, but it was never overbearing, I guess would probably be the best way to put it, because, he always gave me the choice of like, hey, if you don't want to do this anymore, just let me know. It was never a, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we have to do, you're doing this because I did it. It was, I never ever got that vibe at all. And both my parents, I mean, they both let me make those decisions, and they let me, grow my own confidence in what I was doing. And it wasn't just them pushing me along. So I always admired that about both of them. But yeah, I mean, Dad had so much experience and knowledge within the sport. The cars have changed a lot, so maybe not as much on track. I feel like I learned more on track on my own, just because things were so different than when he was coming along. But certainly off track, and the struggles and the challenges and the good people and the bad people that you're going to face along the way, those many years of experience and knowledge, I think have really, really helped from that side, probably more than anything.
Chase, you just mentioned in that answer, you said growing your confidence, and confidence and beliefs got to be such a huge thing as you're in a car going 200 miles an hour. How did you develop that belief, and did you ever have fear, and how'd you overcome that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think there was definitely times I was more nervous than others. I think the fear factor of something happening at the racetrack. I mean, I think we all know that as drivers, I think that there's a possibility that the perfect storm can happen for anyone at any time, and I think we always respect that. But that's just not something that you can sit there and dwell on, because that is going to take away from your performance and ultimately your confidence. It's going to take away from you pushing as hard as you need to push. So I think that aspect of it, probably it's thought about, it's respected, but it's not something that you keep at the forefront of your mind all the time, because you just simply can't. But I think as you grow confidence in other areas in your craft, in the things you're looking for, experience certainly can help with some of that, but just getting in the repetition of doing it every week, and finding a flow for yourself, a weekly flow that, hey, this is what my Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday look like. And when I get to Thursday, I'm prepped for the weekend. And when we get to the racetrack, I know that when we unload and we hit the track for the first time, this is what I'm looking for. So I really think a lot of it just comes back to your preparation. That is going to give you the most confidence, because if you've already thought about a certain scenario, or you're feeling something inside the car that you've either felt before, or you have enough knowledge on other areas that could help point your team in a better direction. All those things are you're just hedging your bet to have a better week when you're better prepared. So I think preparation really goes the furthest for me.
Chase, on the other extreme, on race day, we talk about athletes kind of feeling like they're in a groove. When you're sitting in your car on race day, how long into the race do you feel like, hey, this is going to be a good day? Or is this going to be just a grind? I know the car has a lot to do with it, but even yourself personally, like, how do you have those days where you're like, hey, this is going to be a good day, or this is going to be a day that I'm just going to have to grind through this?
Oh, really early on, most of the time. Some weeks you unload and the car just has a good feel right off the bat in practice. And usually in practice, I can tell whether or not we're in the ballpark. And most of the time, if you're not in the ballpark, you don't typically find it on race weekend. How about that? That doesn't typically just fix itself overnight. Every now and again you can. Every now and again you can struggle really bad in practice and hit a home run and get it right. But it is really, really hard to do that. I mean, that's just you're asking a lot in a short period of time. So pretty early on, I mean, you have a pretty good idea of what you're looking for in the car, especially if you're at a racetrack that you're pretty comfortable with and a place that you know what you're looking for. You can tell pretty quick. But other weeks, you're not immune to being kind of stuck in a middle ground where you're like, man, I think we're close, but we need a little bit, and you just never quite get over the hump. So most of the time pretty quick, but there are those weekends where you're kind of just teetering there in no man's land.
We're going to have some fun for a minute. Ask a couple good questions. What's your favorite track to race at?
Probably Bristol. I don't know if you guys have ever been, or have y'all been to any races?
Yeah,
ever?
I have. Yeah,
been to AMS a few times, and I've driven by Bristol. It's just I haven't been into a race there though.
I came to Daytona with old Chipper a few times down there in spring training.
Yeah, it's super fun. I mean, it really is. Daytona obviously is a great environment to go to a race, and that's such a big event for NASCAR. But yeah, I would say Bristol. The environment there is just super cool, and I think selfishly for me, I always loved baseball and football and all these other sports, and that's the closest thing we get to it because it's inside of a stadium, and I think that's super super neat. So it's just when you show up at Bristol versus other racetracks, it's just like, man, this is different. This has a different feel to it than anywhere else that we go. So I always get excited for that one. When you get to year 8 or 9 or wherever I'm at, it's for a place to still make you feel that way, I think is pretty cool.
That's how I always felt about Wrigley Field, man. Like every time I walked out and stepped out between the ivy, first year to my 12th year, it was the same thing, man. It was just awesome.
Gave you chills.
That's
cool.
What's a favorite race you've ever done?
A favorite race? Man, any of them that you win are always good. NASCAR is the numbers are not on your side from that standpoint, or at least for me. But man, that's so hard. Yes, there have been bigger wins than others. Winning a championship, obviously that day was incredible. But if you just take out those moments, I guess, from a victory standpoint, meaningful races. I mean, the first one, honestly, I mean, I remember that first day, that was my first Daytona 500 was in 2016, and we ended up setting fast time. So we were starting first, and I'm 20 or 20. I think I was 20 at the time. And I'm just walking down pit road and I'm like, man, I don't know that I belong here. I'm looking at Tony Stewart and I'm looking at Matt Kenseth and Jimmy Johnson and Casey Kane and all these guys. And I'm just like, holy smokes, what have I got myself into? We're fixing to start the Daytona 500 and I'm racing against my heroes, like guys that I grew up watching. And just to get past that was a pretty wild moment for me. But
yeah, and realizing they want to kick your butt in about 15 minutes too, right?
For sure, exactly. It's so, and I'm sure no kid is immune to this, right? And especially nowadays, with as young as kids are coming into baseball and football and whatnot. I mean, you're in your early 20s, right? That's not unheard of. But every kid that makes it in whatever sport they want to do, or whatever, not just in sports. There was someone that you admired along the way. There was someone that you liked and that you looked up to and that you wanted to be like. And if you ever face that person, it's like, how do you turn that off? Right then, right there. It's a hard thing to do. And it takes a little bit of time, to get used to being around those guys. But with a little time, you do. And they become your friends in some ways, but also your enemies and your competitors and others. And I think you learn to respect them and they learn to respect you, and you also want to go and beat one another just as bad as they do, and it becomes fun.
That leads me right into what I was going to ask. Who are a couple of the drivers that you admire, and why?
Well, obviously, I was biased living where I did growing up, but as I got older, there were other guys that I looked up to quite a lot, and Casey Kane was one of them. He took over for Dad there for Ray Evernham in the early 2000s. So I thought that was a really special time in my dad's life. And I got to spend some time around Casey as I was a kid, and I always thought he was, he's such a good dude. And he was such a good dude to me then. So I always thought a lot of him. But really and truly, Tony Stewart was the first guy that I finally manned up enough to say, hey, I like this guy, because when you grow up inside, a house of someone else racing, it takes some guts to be like, hey, I think I like this other guy too, not that you were completely jumping ship, but to actually come out and say that, was difficult. So Tony was really that first one for me. He was such a good guy. He's so good with kids from the standpoint, and it's so funny because I see some of the same ways he's treated Keelan, Kevin Harvick's son,
yep.
On pit road and around the racetrack. I'm like, man, that's exactly how I remember my childhood being with Tony too. And just some of those little interactions that he took time to, come up and give me a high five before the race or whatever. I always just thought it was really cool and admired that a lot. And he was a racer's racer. I mean, he was the guy that was willing to go race whatever, whenever, all the time, dirt, asphalt, it didn't matter. And being the race fan that I was, I just admired that and thought it was super cool. And even better that he took some time to be really nice to me. So Tony was really that first one. And I got the chance to race against him. My first year in Cup was his final season. So that was a pretty cool moment too.
That's cool.
So trick question here. So one day you have a son. Would you rather him be a Georgia Bulldog, an Atlanta Brave, or a NASCAR driver?
I'd like for him to get on tour. If I had a choice, I'd like for him to get on tour so he could visit some really nice golf courses.
A nice life
over the course of his life. But no, look, I mean, if I ever had a kid, whatever he wants to do. But my mom did want me to play golf, and she jokes about this all the time. She's like, man, I don't know why you didn't listen to me. I told you playing golf is where it was at, and here I go. I'm trying to play golf when I have off time. So anyways, I do love golf too, but whatever the kid wanted to do, obviously I'm not gonna steer him in a different direction. If they have passion about something, that's great.
Hey Chase, I'm curious, can you kind of take us back to a race day and kind of walk us through what your day's like from the time you get up What do you eat? All those types of things that people be interested in knowing what that's like for you.
Yeah, for sure. So most all of our weeks look, very similar. That there are the occasional Saturday night races that come along, so that can kind of change your week schedule some. But for the most part, all of our races are on Sunday afternoon. So you get up Sunday morning. Your day typically starts around 10 or 11 o'clock. Just say for a 2:30, 3 o'clock race, something like that. Most of the time. I'm a fan of motorsports first and foremost. So if F1 is on, I'll get up first thing Sunday morning and watch the F1 race at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and then kind of go into my day from there. So I'll get up and watch their race and see what's going on wherever they are in the world, which I think is super cool, and admire the craft and whatnot that those guys do, just like any other sport. So like watching that. I get up and get some breakfast, and we have a lot of media obligations and sponsor obligations. NASCAR is driven by sponsors, and ultimately making sure all of our partners are taken care of at the racetrack. If they have guests, there on a Sunday morning, we try to say hey to them as much as we can. Obviously, things can get pretty busy depending upon the race, but yeah, taking care of sponsors, fulfill some media, they're kind of first thing. And then that usually leads to a little bit of a break around lunch. I try to grab, a light lunch. I don't like to eat a ton before the race. I don't want to feel like I just,
yeah. Do you have
had a huge meal?
Do you have a go-to pregame meal?
Not really, just something simple, grilled chicken and rice, or just something super, super straightforward. I don't like going out and feeling like I just had a huge meal. So
Yeah.
I'm outside of that, I'm not super picky, but I just don't want to feel like I'm super
sluggish.
Full. Yeah. And outside of that, yeah, we so you have a little bit of time to yourself there around lunch. I grab a snack, and then we have our final team meeting shortly thereafter. That we just kind of all meet up in the holler, and we talk about just our final thoughts. What changes we made overnight, what the race is looking like, talking about the stages, when optimum times to pit are, how far you can go on fuel, things we've already talked about throughout the beginning of the week, but we're just kind of diving back through some of those fine details. And then after that, the circus starts, with driver intros and all the showman aspect of how NASCAR does things, walking out, and they got fans and whatnot lined up, and they do driver intros, and they kind of make their show out of it, from there. But I'm at that point in time, I'm such a competitive person, and I don't take it lightly. I'm just ready to get the show going. Like, I want to get racing. I want to get started. And I don't know what it was like for you from a baseball standpoint. I don't guess there was as much show in that as I think there is in ours, but or it doesn't seem to be from the outside. But I'm the type of person, I want to get going. I want to go to work. I want to get this deal started.
Yeah, baseball's not quite like that. I remember we had a 7:20 game one time, and Matt Ryan, his rookie year with the Falcons, was hanging out with us at like 7:08, and he's like, do y'all have to go out on the field and get ready? And I think Chipper was still like halfway getting dressed. He's like, y'all play in 11 minutes. We're like, you do too many games.
See, that's awesome.
Yeah, I know, different. But
I wish it was like that. I wish it was like that for us.
Well, y'all got to be a little more locked in, man. I mean, we got time to check out. Y'all don't.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Baseball is so impressive to me from the standpoint of you guys can just be, out there lollygagging, at third base, shooting the breeze with the third base coach or whatever it may be. And then you get this just line drive ball hit straight at you, and you can be quick, to grab it, whatever it may be. I've always found baseball super fascinating from that standpoint. Is you can be lost in space. And when that ball gets hit at you, y'all are so quick to grab it and make the play and know, hey, there's a guy on second, no double play ball, whatever it is.
Well, Jeff was
I
in
think
right
is always
field.
super
Yeah,
He
cool.
had time.
I was in the outfield because my ADD. It didn't let me snap back in like that. Oh, God. Well, finishing up with Chase Elliott. Chase, we got 2 more questions for you real quick, man. What advice would you give to young athletes and drivers, too, that just that you experience that you'd want them to experience?
Oh my gosh. It's hard for me to speak to other sports just because, I don't know enough about the process. But from a motorsport standpoint, um, I think it is, super important to find an area of the, I think that it's so easy for people to be like, hey, so-and-so drove this when he was a kid. I need to go drive that. But I really think it's more important because in different parts of the country, you have different types of racing that is more competitive. And it might be in a different car. It might be on dirt versus asphalt, or it might be, the other way around. And I just think it's super important to recognize, hey, where I live, this is the most competitive thing I can go drive and push myself in to be better. So I think it's about just being super honest with yourself about what is the most competitive arena that I can go get in. What is going to challenge me the most? Am I going to have fun all the time? No, probably not. You're going to get your butt kicked some? Absolutely. But I think it's important to learn those lessons. And I think it's important to get in the most in the toughest environment you can find that's close to home to go and get started. If I were getting involved in other sports, I would have to imagine it's the same way, because at some point down the road, if you progress far enough, you're going to meet someone who is as good as you, and you're going to have to figure out ways to beat them and to be better and be able to evolve and reshape yourself to improve. So always finding the challenge, I think, is key.
And last question, man. We talk a lot on this about the parents, and we've had David Pollock was on, and he was talking about it's got to be the kid's passion. It's got to be their dream. What's your advice to parents, as whether it's athletes or drivers, that, like we say sometimes, tell parents to get out of the way and let their kids play?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't have any kids, so, I don't want to speak too terribly much, but I admire David quite a lot. I've seen a lot of clips of his. I think he has he has my respect. I think he has his life in order. I hated to see him kicked off game day, or whatever.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a bummer. But he seemed, I don't know the guy, but he seems like such a stand-up dude. And I think he's probably a better person to ask about family life than me. But I would tend to agree. I think that if a kid has passion into something, I don't think that you're likely not going to change that. So my parents always let me make that decision and make that call, and I always admired them for it. And I grew up watching other parents push their kids to do things. So I've certainly seen it both ways, but I do agree with him. I think it has to be the kid's interest and the kid's desire, and especially if they have a really strong passion for something, I think that's great. And I think you got to let them run with it.
A pivot real quick. One more. If your kid's 8 years old, I have an 8-year-old son who loves to race. How tell our listeners on here, how do you get started in that? Like you can go to the local baseball field and sign your kid up, but if he wants to race, how can you get him involved?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, living around where we live, there is a few places that you can go and rent go-karts and ride go-karts and just see if it's something that, he has any interest in. Would probably be the easiest thing to do, at least around here. I would say it would be go that route and just see if there's any interest there, any spark for anybody that, might be interested at that age that lives around Georgia. But other parts of the country, there's a lot of options. I mean, you can get really serious really fast. Like there's some racetracks up around North Carolina that kids are racing at 5 or 6 years old, and they're out there just running wide open. I mean, it's the craziest thing you've ever seen. So It just depends on how serious you want to get, how quick, and how much money you want to spend. Ultimately, is really what it comes down to.
Awesome. Well, Chase, we know that you're enjoying some off time and getting better with that shoulder, man. But we appreciate you coming on and sharing your journey with us, man, and wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, man, I appreciate y'all having me a lot, and wish you the very best. And I've thought a lot about your show, and have seen a lot of clips. So thank you for having me, and hope y'all have a Merry Christmas, and hopefully see y'all down the road somewhere.
Thanks, Chase. You too.
so Thanks,
Thanks for
buddy.
being on. Merry Christmas.
Hey guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for checking out Pure Athlete, and subscribe to our channel on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you go to listen to our podcast.